From dropping dough on stolen dino bones to badmouthing their way out of millions, these stars are proof that making money and keeping it are two wildly different things, especially when you've got a $40,000 a week gambling addiction. Nicolas Cage's vast filmography includes plenty of classic performances, like his Oscar-nominated turn in Adaptation and his Oscar-winning role in Leaving Las Vegas. His on-screen success resulted in a fortune, but then his bizarre spending habits got in the way. Cage is a huge fan of Superman, and he once bought a copy of Action Comics #1, the Man of Steel's first appearance, for $150,000. Then there was the $276,000 dinosaur skull. But he especially loved dropping his cash on real estate, including 2 different castles in Europe. Eventually, it got to the point that the IRS filed a $6.3 million tax lien against him. Cage was forced to sell the comic book, and the dinosaur skull was seized after it was determined that it was stolen, although that didn't mean that Cage got his money back. In 2019, he told the New York Times, "It's no secret that mistakes have been made in my past that I've had to try to correct. But one thing I wasn't going to do was file for bankruptcy. I had this pride thing where I wanted to work my way through anything, which was both good and bad. And work he did, as he reportedly filmed 20 movies in one 2-year span." Kim Basinger may be an Oscar winner, but that didn't keep her out of bankruptcy court. In 1991, she backed out of the lead role of a small film called Boxing Helena, and this breach of contract led to a lawsuit. It took years to go through the courts, with Basinger originally being told to pay over $8 million in damages and attorney's fees. This was later overturned on appeal, but not before she filed for Chapter 11. She eventually settled the dispute for $3.8 million. Basinger might have had more money available if not for a strange purchase she made a couple of years earlier. In 1989, she and other investors spent $20 million to buy a small Georgia town near where she grew up. The original plans included building a movie studio, restoring the town's old buildings, and making a film about the area. But these dreams remained unrealized, and Basinger eventually began selling off pieces of her vast purchase to address her financial difficulties.
Everybody seems to be kind of disappointed right now because they thought when she bought this thing, they'd do something with it right away, I reckon.
Stephen Baldwin might not be as famous as his older brother Alec or his son-in-law Justin Bieber, although he did make quite the impact in the 1995 crime flick The Usual Suspects. But that wasn't enough to prevent some serious financial troubles. In 2006, Baldwin tried to sell his New York home, but when there were no takers, he just stopped paying his mortgage. When he filed for bankruptcy in 2009, it was revealed that he actually had 2 mortgages on the home. It turned out that he owed a combined $1.2 million on them, while the house was only worth $1.1 million. He was also dealing with $1 million in back taxes and $70,000 in credit card debt. Baldwin managed to hold on to his home until 2017, when a judge ruled that the bank could auction it off and demanded that the actor vacate the property. But he didn't exactly learn his lesson when it came to paying his bills on time. In 2013, he was ordered to pay $400,000 in back taxes after failing to file for another 3 years, although that total was eventually reduced to $300,000. Gary Coleman found fame at a young age in the late 70s and early 80s on the classic sitcom Different Strokes, though he struggled to land another hit in the years to come. When he was about to turn 18, he gained access to his trust fund, but instead of the $18 million that it should have contained, there was less than $250,000 left. He eventually won a series of lawsuits against his parents and representative, although he only received $3.8 million, barely 20% of what he'd earned. Despite this relatively small victory, Coleman's financial problems continued. While he was cast in the occasional guest starring TV role, he also began working non-showbiz jobs, most notably as a security guard. Alas, he lost that job in 1998 after assaulting a persistent autograph hunter. Then in 1999, he filed for bankruptcy. When he died in 2010 at the age of 42, he left a will that stated, "I direct my personal representative to plan a wake for me conducted by those who have had no financial ties to me and can look each other in the eyes and say they really cared personally for Gary Coleman." Burt Reynolds' career was thriving in the 70s and 80s thanks to hit films like Smokey and the Bandit and Deliverance. He spent the money he earned liberally on expensive properties, 150 horses, a private jet, and a helicopter. He also invested $20 million in a couple of restaurant chains, but the restaurants were failures and he lost much of his fortune.
I do silly things.
Then there was his divorce from his longtime partner Lonnie Anderson, which dragged on for years and racked up millions in attorney's fees. Anderson later accused him of often failing to pay child support for their son. She took him to court again decades later, which resulted in Reynolds paying Anderson everything he owed from the divorce. On top of all that, in 1996, CBS demanded that Reynolds pay back $3.7 million that the company had lent him. It eventually got so bad that he filed for bankruptcy. Despite his many financial issues, it doesn't sound like they weighed too heavily on his psyche. When Vanity Fair asked him in 2015 what his greatest regrets were, he replied, "I would have spent more money and had a lot more fun." Debbie Reynolds was a successful singer and actor, but her divorce from Eddie Fisher became infamous, and the drama surrounding it overshadowed Reynolds' career. Then there were her notorious financial problems. In the midst of her second divorce from businessman Harry Carl, she claimed that he'd blown her savings on his gambling addiction, by some estimates up to $100 million. While her first two marriages ended pretty badly, it was actually her third one that led her to bankruptcy court. In the 1970s, Reynolds started collecting Hollywood memorabilia. So when third husband Richard Hamlet recommended that she bid on a Las Vegas hotel that was up for auction in 1992, she bought it with the intention of housing her enormous collection. But the Debbie Reynolds Hotel and Casino was a massive waste of money. While it only cost $200,000 to purchase, it cost another $2 million to fix up, and Reynolds had to ask for loans, sell some of her jewelry, and borrow against her other properties. A few years later, she sunk another $7 or $8 million into it. The venture lost millions every year, and Reynolds was forced to file for bankruptcy after failing to sell the hotel in 1997. David Cassidy was a massive star in the 1970s thanks to his time on the musical sitcom The Partridge Family. But according to him, while the studio used his name and likeness to make $500 million off of merchandise from the show, he had to fight to get even a penny of it. As he told Yahoo in 2017, "I saw 15 grand. Now that's corrupt. But I was the first person to renegotiate and get a piece of the show, the first person to get anything from these people." It's little in comparison to today, but it was a lot then, and you have to put things in their proper perspective. I would have $80 million instead of $8 million now.
They say you were a millionaire by the age of 21 or something like that? That must be a heck of a pressure on you.
That extra money would have come in handy. Despite selling an estimated 30 million records in his career, Cassidy filed for bankruptcy in 2015 after spending over $2 million on a Florida mansion, as well as buying property in the Bahamas. This resulted in him owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to various creditors. Bankruptcy documents showed that he was spending $15,000 more each month than he was earning. His wife also filed for divorce around this time. He was eventually forced to auction off his home and belongings to pay off his debts. Comedian and actor Sinbad has filed for bankruptcy a couple of times. The first was in 2009, but the petition was denied because he filed incorrectly. 4 years later, though, he got the documents right. Unfortunately, though, he owed just shy of $11 million to creditors, including a whopping $8.3 million in back taxes to the IRS. Meanwhile, he claimed to only have $131,000 in assets. According to Sinbad, he had been self-funding his business ventures, including the salaries of people who worked for his company. He also claimed that he always planned on honoring his debts.
So I spent money. I kept thinking, okay, I'll get one more movie and I'll wipe these bills out. But that movie didn't come.
Sinbad also took offense to suggestions that he was living extravagantly. During his bankruptcy proceedings, he was required to attend a course on personal financial management. Mickey Rooney's life was full of ups and downs. He was a child star, he got married 8 times, and he made $12 million before he turned 40. But he also had a bit of a gambling addiction. While he was playing Las Vegas in the 50s and 60s, he was making $20,000 per week, but then he would head to the casino and lose twice that much. Rooney first filed for bankruptcy in 1962, as he owed creditors about $500,000 while only having $500 in assets. He filed for bankruptcy a second time in 1996 after he ended up owing $1.75 million to the IRS in back taxes. He was still traveling around performing live at the age of 85, apparently because he was broke. In his later years, Rooney was allegedly abused both physically and financially by his 8th wife and stepson. The latter was accused of embezzling $8.5 million from Rooney, who was reportedly worth only $18,000 when he died in 2014 at the age of 93.
Was he ever afraid for his safety, for his physical well-being?
He was afraid, certainly psychologically afraid.
Zsa Zsa Gabor enjoyed a long career in Hollywood, although she was perhaps more famous for her beauty and her extensive list of husbands. The Hungarian native also had her share of financial problems, many through no fault of her own. During the recession of the early 1990s, her various properties in California plummeted in value. Then in 2009, it emerged that she'd been swindled out of somewhere between $7 and $10 million by Bernie Madoff. But then there was the problem that was very much of Gabor's own making, her feud with fellow actor Elke Sommer. The two had been sniping at each other for years when Gabor badmouthed Sommer in an interview. Sommer sued and eventually won a $3.3 million libel judgment against Gabor and her husband. Gabor filed for bankruptcy the following year. Gary Busey wasn't always known for being the eccentric character he is today. Back in 1978, he even turned in an Oscar-nominated performance in the lead role of the Buddy Holly story. But then, somewhere along the way, he lost most of his money. In 2012, he filed for bankruptcy, as he owed creditors over $500,000 while having less than $50,000 in assets. In a statement to ABC News, the actor's attorney stated, "As with many great American institutions, i.e. General Motors, American Airlines, and others who have utilized the strategic business plan of bankruptcy, Gary's filing is the final chapter in a process that began a few years ago of jettisoning the litter of past unfortunate choices, associations, circumstances, and events."
How am I doing today, Gary Busey? You're doing great! Good! Then I'll keep it up!
In theory, the bankruptcy was successful. Busey was allowed to keep his limited assets, and almost $60,000 of his debts were discharged. But alas, the IRS doesn't allow for that when you owe it money. The vast majority of Busey's debts were to the government, which wanted a little more than $450,000 in back taxes, so he emerged from bankruptcy owing almost as much as he did before.